Hey everyone, this is PrinceBrightstar and welcome back to Secrets of New Genesis. So, Chapter 5 has hit and we finally have some answers about what's going on. With that said, we didn't quite get enough, but there are several things to explore today, including some possible ideas of where the story may be headed. If this is your first time looking into this series, basically I take a look at Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis from a lore perspective and try to understand just how the world in the game makes sense and try to connect what I see with other plot points we've seen previously in the Phantasy Star series. Today we start up on Lucille. We have to start today with the cast with a skull himself, Zephetto, the one who set up everything that was happening on Halpha. But let's take a step back and understand this name. Zephetto is one way to say it. Another is Geppetto, as in that Geppetto, the woodcarver that created Pinocchio. And what was Pinocchio? A doll. It's the kind of thing that makes you go, oh yeah! And yet, nobody ever figured it out. Previously, the series had looked to sources such as the Hindu Rig Veda hymns. This is where we get names such as Varuna, Mitra, Vayu, Indra, and Agni. The first three were first known as mags in Phantasy Star Online, while the latter two were names attached to force weapons. Meanwhile, in Phantasy Star Online 2, we obviously know Varuna and Mitra as the servants of Shiva. However, names like Geppetto and Pinocchio? That's from Brothers Grimm fairy tales. It is a breath of fresh air to see the series expanding from its roots, finally bringing in new concepts. Granted, I don't think I ever would have expected this. One last thing to point out about Zephetto. He says he's part of Resurgent Arcs, but if you look at his shoulders and translate, it actually comes out as Observation Group Arcs. Perhaps this is a division within Resurgent Arcs, or it could be the name of the group he was a part of before the Starless attacked the first time. Up in Lucille, we finally got some real information about Halpha. The game spells everything about the environments on Halpha out on the glass cases, and to translate it, all you needed was the original Phantasy Star Online 2 font. So let's try translating one of them now. It all starts with Halpha's real name, or rather how it's truly spelled, H-Alpha. This lore dump right here is huge because it brings in pure science. H-Alpha is a deep red visible spectral line of the hydrogen atom, part of the Balmer series. It emits when an electron falls from a hydrogen atom's third to second lowest energy level. Okay, I'm not a scientist and this is going beyond anything I've ever dealt with. But for our purposes, we now understand the basic principle around why the dolls would change color from blue to red. Blue generally means an okay status, while red is some kind of in danger status. Now, until Sega actually shows us electrons moving within dolls, I'm going to say that's probably not actually happening here, but this leaves the question, what would cause a shift to purple? Perhaps it simply meant they had been overcharged in some way from their normal status. With names like Malevolent in play, it would seem to point that way. As for the rest of the text, let me read it verbatim. H-Alpha Biome Test R3 KV003 Clone Series 5718. Growth stats all within normal range. Stability clear. Test completed. Ready for implementation. So basically, all the terrain down on H-Alpha is a result of the testing done up here on Lucille. RA9G3-T909. This is the name given to the player, but what does all this mean? Let's break this thing down. RA obviously is short for Resurgent Arcs. G3 means Generation 3. And T909 is Test Subject 909. That leaves us with one final 9 to solve, and I think I've got the answer. I believe it's location data, or rather, it indicates that this is the 9th Resurgent Arc's location. Now, you might be wondering how I can prove such a thing. It's a secret hidden in plain sight, but I saw this secret long ago. We all saw it when I pointed it out originally as a local star chart several secrets videos ago. Let's look again. We can easily find 9 planets within this star chart. But this leads to another question. Where is H Alpha? We can actually make a fairly educated guess here. Assuming H Alpha is shown on this chart, this would mean we simply need to count the number of planets in the sky we can see. And what I count is 1, along with a companion moon for that planet. This eliminates the entire left side, as each of those only has 1 planet around their star. This leaves us with 2 groups. In the lower system, there are 5 planets around that star. This thus leaves us with the true location of H Alpha, the one in the upper right. And we can verify this since if we now consider these satellites to be Lucille-like platforms, this planet in particular has one right next to it, thus this is H Alpha. If you ask me, this feels like a Batman Arkham Asylum secret room, except we didn't have to blow up any walls to get in. This was in front of us the whole time, and very few people took notice. Now, instead, we have an idea of what Sega's cooking up for future episodes of the game. I still wish the resolution on this thing was a bit better so we could read the names of some of the planets, though. I'll also point out that there appear to be some rings that don't have planets on them. Could this mean that the planets there were destroyed? Or could they simply indicate asteroid belts, planets that never finished forming? Those that were watching as I went through Chapter 5 will remember I said a very specific name when I first saw the starless.
Data match. Approximately 1,000 objects closely resembling starless spearhead units.
Impossible.
Wait,
So,
is...
the day has come early.
Are those Seed? Now, I said this name based on what I remembered of how the Seed initially attacked the Guardians colony. Funnily enough, in the recent NGS Headline Plus, there was something very interesting said. I'll let the hosts speak for themselves.
Dees is spelled D-E-E-S. Spell that backwards, Phantasy Star fans. D-E-E-S spells S-E-E-D. Seed.
Seed.
Now, I want to be clear. Whenever I figured out what that meant, which, by the way, Seed is the name of the enemy race in Phantasy Star Universe series.
Yes.
I was soy jacking at the developers. I was like pointing at them like no.
I see what you did.
So I asked, "Is this mean that Phantasy Star Universe is coming back?"
Yeah.
And they were like, "No, it's just an Easter egg for fans to understand."
Yeah.
But once they heard our reaction to these, they knew we didn't. This isn't like censorship. They knew they needed to do something different because they got our raw reactions, and we're like. So I want to emphasize that yes, there's no plot implications to that name.
Yeah.
The Seed reference.
No,
It's not a plot reference. It is
unconnected.
NGS is telling its own story, and also it's just not very good story writing if you tell this whole long story and then be like, but the bad guy was actually this dude from a video game 20 years ago that most of you haven't played. That's not good story writing.
My response to that would require its own separate video, but anyway. While I was correct in one sense, this more than likely ends any chance Lucille is Goralian technology, despite the similar features. The only way I can take a win on that now is if it actually does, at some point, allow you to launch a subspace vehicle. At this point, there are so many different directions the game could go in, and we won't know more until Sega says something. I'd like to try spitballing some ideas. This isn't a completely exhaustive list of all the ideas I have, and all of these could be wrong in the end, and since inherently most of these are going to be wrong, I won't be taking an L on them when the time comes. I'm just hoping at least one of these is right, though. Okay, let's knock the Maze Runner analog out first that others have been suggesting. So, in this scenario, Zephetto is still alive, and there are several things that would seem to point this way. First, that was awfully convenient timing, wasn't it? Zephetto just finishes talking about his mission to restore the Arks, and who comes knocking but the Starless themselves? And almost a whole year early. No, seriously, If you convert the number of seconds indicated by the computer early in Chapter 5, you get almost a year. This is once again a nod to things taking place 1,000 years later. I'll be returning to this timing as I spitball, but for this one, let's be a bit more direct with the Maze Runner. In that, the first story of it was about escaping and learning the truth, while the second chapter was about testing for immunity. Now, relating this back to Phantasy Star, we can certainly say the journey to Lucille could be seen as an escape, but if Zephetto is still alive, and checking for immunity, that leads to two questions. First, where is he? And secondly, what is he testing for immunity from? Let's tackle the first, and it's quite simple. He could be anywhere. No, seriously, look at all these Lucille-like platforms. He could be on any of them, even these three hanging out next to nothing? What are these? Backup Lucille's? Possibly. There's also another possible location he could be, though. Gyra, spoken of during the autumn seasonal event. And then, for the second question, Zephetto could be checking for immunity from the Starless. Now, you might be asking, why is this important? Well, let me remind you of a certain event from Phantasy Star Universe. As part of that story, there were people who became infected by the Seed. These people eventually turned into hideous servants of the Seed. With that in mind, it would make sense why Zephetto wouldn't consider his experiments 100% complete until he can confirm that these arcs can stand up to the Starless without turning into Starless themselves. Another possible path for the story is we could see the origins of Star Emperor Aquilo. For those that don't know, Aquilo is a legendary figure that led some people on board an Ark ship to the planet Vandor and beat back a Dark Falls that was destroying the world. This legend was spoken of, and evidence of the legend being true were found in Idola Phantasy Star Saga. This mobile game was shut down in 2022. We know from Zephetto's dialogue that he was creating a fourth clone before he left Lucille. It's possible Aquilo could be this fourth clone Arx. Does this mean we'll be playing second fiddle to him through the rest of the game since our character is only Generation 3? To be seen, I guess. Depending on how quickly we get off of H-Alpha, if we are able to leave anytime soon, it could lead to some interesting events taking place. There are several unanswered questions about this world, and if Crawford is able to take over the control systems of Lucille, there are several possible things we may be able to do. Some examples include unfreezing Kavaris and regaining access to the weapons and technology in Lost Central, figuring out why the planet has metal plating underneath the ground rather than this being a terraformed planet, winding the dolls down and turning them into a support force, and even perhaps see the reconstruction of Vanford Labs. I've been saying this for years. It's my belief that Phantasy Star Online 2 is a prequel to the 8 and 16-bit Algol games of Phantasy Star. However, I should also explain how this even works. Some may be thinking that I'm saying Phantasy Star Online 2 leads directly to the events that play out on Algol, but that's not right. These aren't events that happen next to each other. Rather, there is several 100 million years separating them. This distance in time comes from the Phantasy Star Official Production Compendium. With this in mind, let's think for a moment about the Starless. The Arks likely wouldn't have forgotten that their prior enemy was called Fallspawn or Darkers, depending upon your version of the game, even 500 years later. Heck, Zephetto names Dark Falls by name, which means I don't think the enemy we're going to go up against are of darkness. Rather, one way Sega could play this is that this enemy may actually be light photon based and weak to dark megaphotons instead. And if this is the case, this could actually end up being the perversion of the Great Light that was used to fight the primordial darkness during the end of Episode 6. This perversion could have, over time, built up power and attacked the ones that created it, the Arks. Taking this one step further, however, let's go back to that 1 year remaining time frame I mentioned earlier. The Starless basically appeared a year early. The question of who made the prediction of 500 years comes into play. However, I also wonder if perhaps something else will show up instead after that year passes. That being the primordial darkness, the one that was left in the Edge. Though it was never exact when it came to Algol, a Dark Falls would appear approximately every 1,000 years when the seal on the profound darkness was weakened. If that is the case, we're going to have the battle between the Great Light and the primordial darkness play out starting in a year, and the Arcs are simply going to get caught in the crossfire. This is also a battle the Arcs will not be able to win, as there's a time period of hundreds of millions of years before this battle ends. It's only 2 million years before Elisa sets out on her journey to avenge her brother that the Algol star system was even created by the Great Light. But we also know fighting the Great Light is something that's been on Sega's list ever since it was mentioned that Phantasy Star V would have been the people of Algol searching out the Great Light. Obviously, everything could simply be at face value. Everything Zephetto said is true. The Starless attacked, Arcs was broken, and now it's possible to fight back. That's what we're going to do next. Whether we use H-Alpha as our home base, or if we're going to go to other Arcs inhabited worlds is still up in the air. It's just a question of what form this all takes from here on out. It's possible when the Starless attack H-Alpha, we're going to see a Scorched Earth scenario play out. As I mentioned before, during the beta, a Japanese player glitched into Crawford's room, and we saw in there that the screens had been damaged. It's possible that could have been Starless damage. I also wonder if that mysterious battle theme you're hearing now, that has been in Halfya Lake since the launch of the game, will start playing, and Halfya Lake will turn into a battle area for encountering the Starless. This track is unlike anything else in the game, sounding more like it belongs in Phantasy Star Universe than it does in New Genesis. Again, the way to trigger this track is to drag an enemy from Resolve Forest to the border of Halfya Lake. Then cross over the border, and before the music switches back to the normal calm theme, disconnect your internet to force a 630 error. This will allow you to hear the full version of the track, no hacking or data mining required. Finally, I'm going to give a nod to my right-hand Rooks 37. Spoilers for Sonic Frontiers. If you haven't seen Rooks' Twitter thread, it's very much worth a read, as it postulates how the Draconians from Amduskia may be the ancients that disappeared, and the reason they were doing what they were doing was so they could recreate the reincarnation cycle they once had. The symbol that shows when they ascend being another way of writing Shao's name. I'm going to piggyback off that here, and suggest that the reason the Starless disappeared 500 years ago is because one of their command structures was locked away by the Giants, which Sonic defeated and freed. The form of the final boss in Sonic Frontiers is that of a moon that talks to you. Now where have we heard that one before? Hello, Xion clone! The reason I put this last is because it's one of the most outlandish ideas possible. It suggests the idea that both Phantasy Star and Sonic the Hedgehog are in-universe with each other. Basically, we can blame Sonic the Hedgehog for allowing the Starless to resume the attack they had begun 500 years ago against the universe. To think it could be 1,000 years later, and the Arcs are still cleaning up the mess the Photoners left. Now, obviously, the end blew up, but that doesn't mean it couldn't have done something in its final moments, sent some kind of signal before Sonic and Supreme crashed into it, destroying it. We've seen how it's possible for Xion clones to create clones, like how Xiao created his own clone in Sierra. Sierra said herself she's the granddaughter of Xion. Now again, these are just some of the ideas in my head. It's possible the story could head in yet another direction. But at this point, there are too many unanswered questions. Here's a list of what I'm still looking to get answered. What's the deal with the altars? Are they Starless infected? Again, what are the Starless? I know I already brought up the seed connection, but there's another angle. They seem to attack with pixel boxes? If that's the case, what's with the pixel boxes we see during Zephetto's battle? And what of the pixel boxes we saw during the Mother fight in PSO2 Episode 4, and on Hitsugi's sword? Could the Starless be ether-based? What's the deal with Halfya Lake? Who turned the water off during the Dark Falls Aegis fight, and what's with the 3 platforms that seem to be putting out water? When will the barriers around the 4 major areas be taken down? Can they be taken down, or am I right and there's just space out there? Was it Zephetto that put those seasonal symbols on the dolls and other enemies? We can at least surmise that he was the one that dropped the temperature around December. What information did Zephetto leave us with? Directions on how to reach the main Ark's fleet, or what's left? The keys to switch the dolls from kill mode to support mode? What H-Alpha's true capabilities are? Was Vanford Labs destroyed because the Arks on Halpha were headed too much in the direction of technology over photon sensitivity? What's the status of what remains of the Ark's fleet? Was it just a small portion that was destroyed and people like Xiao and Sierra are still okay? Also, if we're bringing Ether into this, what's the status of Earth and Phalag Ives? These are just some of the questions in my mind, and there are plenty more. Some answers may be revealed in time, but I expect most will not be addressed given where the game is at this point. So that's what I've got for today. Version 2 is just around the corner, and I can't wait to see what this update will bring. With any luck, we'll also get some more story with it. If you've enjoyed this look into the lore and theories I've come up with, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe for when I put out more videos in this series. Thank you for joining me today. This is PrinceBrightstar signing off. I'll catch you next time.